The sound of shuffling cards and clinking glasses filled the smoky air of the Red Canyon Saloon in the mining town of Silver Ridge, Montana Territory on a frigid February evening in 1876. But nothing could have prepared Catherine Brennan for the moment when Jack Hawkeye Sullivan slapped down a fistful of beaver pelts and announced to the poker table that he intended to wager her very freedom in the next hand. Catherine froze in the corner where she had been serving whiskey to a table of miners, the tin pitcher trembling in her hands. She'd been working at the saloon for 3 months now, ever since her father died in a cave-in at the copper mine just outside town. The debt he had left behind, gambling debts to men like Sullivan, had passed to her according to the twisted logic of frontier justice, and the trapper had been circling her like a wolf ever since. He had made it clear that he considered her his property, though she had fought him at every turn, refusing his advances and keeping a knife strapped to her thigh beneath her worn calico skirt. Sullivan was a wiry man with sharp features and sharper eyes, dressed in buckskins that reeked of animal blood in the mountain wilderness. He dealt in furs and had made a small fortune trading with the railroad companies pushing west. He was also cruel, and Catherine had seen the bruises on the last woman who had been foolish enough to accept his attentions. That woman had disappeared 6 months ago, and no one spoke of her anymore. "I am not yours to wager," Catherine said, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet saloon. Every eye turned to her, and she felt the weight of their stares. She was 22 years old, with auburn hair she kept pinned back and green eyes that held more fire than fear, though plenty of the latter coursed through her veins. Sullivan turned in his chair, a lazy smile spreading across his face. "Your daddy owed me $300, girl. That makes you mine until the debt is paid. And since you cannot pay it, I figure I might as well have some fun with what's rightfully mine." The other men at the table shifted uncomfortably. There was Pete Halloran, the general store owner, and 2 ranch hands from the Circle K spread south of town. None of them met her eyes. This was the way of things out here, where a man's word was law and a woman alone had precious few rights. "I will pay the debt," Catherine said, though she had no idea how. "Give me time." Sullivan laughed, a sound like rocks scraping together. "Time's up, sweetheart. Now, gentlemen, shall we play?" The saloon doors swung open, bringing with them a blast of cold air and snow. A man stepped through, and Catherine felt her breath catch despite her fear. He was enormous, easily 6 feet 4 inches tall, with shoulders that seemed to fill the doorway. His hair was dark brown and fell past his collar, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. He wore a heavy coat made of bear fur, and beneath it she could see the bulge of powerful muscles. His eyes, when they swept the room, were a startling pale blue, like ice in sunlight. The stranger stomped snow from his boots and moved to the bar, his movements careful despite his size. Catherine had seen mountain men before, trappers and hunters who came down from the high country for supplies, but this man was different. There was a quietness to him, a sense of controlled strength that made the other men in the room seem small by comparison. "Whiskey," he said to Frank, the barkeep, his voice a deep rumble. Frank poured without comment, and the stranger tossed back the drink in one smooth motion. He was about to order another when Sullivan's voice rang out again. "Come on, boys, do not let me down now. 1 hand of 5-card draw. I put up these pelts, worth $200 easy, and the girl's debt gets reduced by that much if I lose. When I win, I take her with me tonight." Catherine's stomach turned. She set down the pitcher and reached for the knife at her thigh, but Pete Halloran was already shaking his head. "This is not right, Sullivan. You cannot wager a person." "I can wager what's mine," Sullivan said coldly. "You in or out?" The stranger at the bar turned slowly. His eyes found Catherine first, taking in her pale face and the way her hand gripped the edge of the table for support. Then his gaze shifted to Sullivan, and something dangerous flickered in those ice-blue depths. "What is her name?" the stranger asked. Sullivan blinked, surprised to be interrupted. "What's it to you?" "Her name," the stranger repeated, each word deliberate. "Catherine Brennan," Frank supplied from behind the bar. "Her pa was Michael Brennan, worked the mine before it took him." The stranger nodded slowly. He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch that clinked with the sound of coins. He walked to the poker table, his boots heavy on the wooden floor, and dropped the pouch in the center. It landed with a solid thud. "How much is the debt?" he asked Catherine directly, ignoring Sullivan. She swallowed hard. $300. The stranger opened the pouch and began counting out gold coins. Catherine watched, mesmerized, as he stacked them in neat piles. When he finished, he pushed them toward Sullivan. $300. The debt is paid. She is free. Sullivan's face darkened. "Now hold on. I had an arrangement with her father. This is between me and her." "Not anymore." The stranger's voice was quiet, but there was steel in it. "The debt is paid. Let her be." For a moment, Catherine thought Sullivan might back down, but the trapper's eyes narrowed, and he stood up from the table, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. "I do not take kindly to interference in my business, stranger. Maybe you should head back to whatever mountain you crawled down from." The stranger did not move. He simply stood there, solid as granite, his hands loose at his sides. Catherine could see the other men in the saloon backing away, sensing what was coming. "Take the money and walk away," the stranger said. Sullivan's knife cleared its sheath in a flash of steel. He lunged forward, but he might as well have been moving through molasses for all the good it did him. The stranger's hand shot out, catching Sullivan's wrist in midair. There was a sharp crack, and Sullivan screamed, the knife clattering to the floor. The stranger had not even shifted his weight. "I said take the money and walk away," he repeated, releasing Sullivan's wrist. Sullivan stumbled back, cradling his arm, his face twisted in pain and rage. "You broke my damn wrist. Be grateful that is all I broke." The stranger's tone was conversational, almost friendly, but the threat beneath it was unmistakable. "You have your money. The lady is free. If I hear you have bothered her again, I will come back, and next time I will not be so gentle." Sullivan looked like he wanted to argue, but one glance at the stranger's face convinced him otherwise. He scooped up the gold coins with his good hand, shoving them into his pockets and backed toward the door. "This is not over," he spat, but everyone in the room knew it was. When Sullivan had gone, the tension in the saloon eased. Men returned to their drinks and their card games, though they kept glancing at the stranger with a mixture of respect and wariness. Catherine stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. The stranger turned to her, and his expression softened. "Are you all right, miss?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. Up close, he was even more imposing, but there was a gentleness in his eyes that made her feel safer than she had in months. "Thank you," she managed. "I do not know how I will ever repay you." "No need," he said. "No man should treat a woman that way." "What is your name?" she asked. He hesitated, as if he had not been asked that question in a long time. "Caleb. Caleb MacKenzie. I am Catherine Brennan, but I suppose you already know that." She offered a trembling smile. "Can I buy you a drink, Caleb? It is the least I can do." He considered this, then nodded. "I would like that." They moved to a table in the corner, away from the main crowd. Catherine poured them both whiskey with shaking hands, and they sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what had just happened settling between them. "Where did you come from?" Catherine asked finally. "I have not seen you in Silver Ridge before." "I have a cabin up in the mountains, about 20 miles north of here," Caleb said. "I come down for supplies a few times a year. I was not planning to stay long, but I needed ammunition and salt." "You live up there alone?" He nodded. "For the past 5 years. I trap in the winter, hunt in the summer. It is a quiet life." Catherine studied him, trying to imagine what would drive a man to such isolation. "Do you not get lonely?" Caleb's eyes met hers, and she saw something flicker there, some old pain that he kept buried deep. "Sometimes. But the mountain is honest. It does not lie or cheat. It does not pretend to be something it is not." She understood, more than he probably realized. People can be cruel. "Yes." He took a sip of his whiskey. "What about you? Do you plan to stay in Silver Ridge?" Catherine had not let herself think that far ahead. Her entire life had been consumed with surviving day to day, with dodging Sullivan's advances and trying to scrape together enough money to eat. Now, suddenly, she was free, and the future stretched before her like an unmarked trail. "I do not know," she admitted. "I have no family left, no ties here except the job at the saloon, but I have nowhere else to go." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, and Catherine sensed he was wrestling with something. Finally, he spoke, his words careful. "I have a proposition for you, if you will hear it." She leaned forward, curious. I'm listening. My cabin is warm and dry, and I have plenty of food stored for the winter. I could use help with the work, someone to cook and mend and keep the place in order. In return, you would have a safe place to stay, away from men like Sullivan. Come spring, if you want to leave, I will bring you back to town or take you wherever you want to go, no strings attached. Catherine's first instinct was to refuse. She barely knew this man, and the idea of going into the wilderness with him seemed reckless at best, dangerous at worst. But then she thought of the alternatives. She could stay in Silver Ridge, working at the saloon, always looking over her shoulder to see if Sullivan had come back. She could try to make her way to another town, but she had no money for the stagecoach, and winter was at its worst. Or she could trust this stranger who had saved her, who had broken a man's wrist to protect her, and asked nothing in return. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "You do not know me." Caleb's gaze was steady. "Because I know what it is like to need help and not have anywhere to turn. And because I meant what I said. No man should treat a woman the way Sullivan treated you." There was a sincerity in his voice that touched something deep inside her. Catherine had learned to be suspicious of kindness, to question every motive, but she found herself wanting to believe him. "All right," she said quietly. "I will come with you, but only until spring." Caleb nodded. Only until spring. They left Silver Ridge before dawn the next morning, Caleb's pack horse loaded with supplies. Catherine had few possessions to bring, just a change of clothes and a small trunk that had belonged to her mother. Caleb had purchased winter gear for her from the general store, a heavy wool coat and fur-lined gloves, and she was grateful for them as they climbed into the mountains. The trail was steep and treacherous, covered in snow and ice. Caleb led the way on foot, guiding his horse with practiced ease, and Catherine followed on a gentle mare he had borrowed from the livery. She was not an experienced rider, but the mare seemed to sense her nervousness and picked her way carefully. They did not speak much during the journey. The cold was too intense for casual conversation, and Catherine was too busy concentrating on staying in the saddle. But she was aware of Caleb constantly, of the way he checked on her every few minutes, making sure she was keeping up. When they stopped to rest, he built a fire with swift efficiency and handed her a canteen of water and strips of dried meat. "How much farther?" she asked, her teeth chattering despite the fire. "Another few hours," Caleb said. "We will be there before nightfall." True to his word, they reached the cabin just as the sun was setting behind the peaks. Catherine's first glimpse of it took her breath away. It was larger than she had expected, built from thick logs and nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. Smoke curled from the chimney, and she realized Caleb must have banked the fire before he left. Inside, the cabin was cozy and surprisingly well kept. There was a large stone fireplace along one wall, a sturdy table and chairs in the center, and a bed in the corner covered with thick furs. Shelves lined the walls, filled with supplies and tools, and strings of herbs hung from the rafters. It smelled of pine and smoke, and something earthy that she could not quite place. "This is beautiful," Catherine said, looking around in wonder. Caleb seemed pleased by her reaction. "I built it myself. Took me the better part of a year, but it is solid. Keeps out the cold and the critters." He showed her around, pointing out where he stored food and water, where the extra blankets were kept. There was a small root cellar dug into the ground outside, stocked with potatoes and carrots and onions. Behind the cabin was a shed for the horses and a smokehouse for preserving meat. "I will sleep out in the shed," Caleb said, gesturing to the bed. "You can have the cabin." Catherine started to protest, but he held up a hand. "I insist. I have done it before in colder weather than this. You will be safe here." She wanted to argue, to tell him that she would not force him out of his own bed, but the exhaustion from the journey was catching up with her, and the thought of sleeping in a warm, soft bed was too tempting to resist. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Caleb nodded and turned to stoke the fire. Catherine watched him work, noticing the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt, the competence in every gesture. He was a man who knew how to survive, who had carved out a life for himself in the harshest of environments. And yet there was a loneliness about him too, a sense that he had been hurt and had retreated to the mountains to heal. That night, Catherine lay in the bed that smelled of pine and fir, and she listened to the wind howling outside. For the first time in months, she felt safe. She did not know what the future held, but for now, she was warm and dry and protected. And that was enough. The days settled into a rhythm. Catherine woke each morning to find Caleb already up, tending to the horses or checking his traps. She would prepare breakfast, simple fare of porridge or eggs from the chickens he kept in a small coop, and they would eat together in companionable silence. Then, Caleb would head out for the day, and Catherine would set to work on the chores he had mentioned. She cleaned the cabin from top to bottom, swept the floors, and scrubbed the table. She mended his clothes, which were worn and patched in a dozen places, and she cooked hearty meals that filled the cabin with warmth and the scent of roasting meat and fresh bread. She had not realized how much she missed having a home, a place to care for and make her own. Caleb, for his part, was a quiet presence, but not an unfriendly one. He answered her questions about the mountain and the wildlife, teaching her which plants were safe to eat and which tracks belonged to which animals. He showed her how to set snares for rabbits and how to gut a fish. She learned that he had grown up in Ohio, the youngest of 4 brothers, and had come west after the war. He did not talk about the war itself, and Catherine did not press him. She told him about her own life, about growing up in Silver Ridge as the daughter of a miner, about her mother who had died when she was 15. She talked about her father, who had been a good man but a weak one, prone to drink and gambling. She spoke of the loneliness she had felt after his death, the fear of being at Sullivan's mercy. "I felt like I was drowning," she admitted one evening as they sat by the fire, "like the walls were closing in and there was no way out." Caleb looked at her, his expression serious. "You are safe now. Sullivan will not find you here." "I know." She hesitated, then asked, "Do you ever regret coming up here, living alone?" He considered the question. "Sometimes, but I needed the space. The war, it changed me. I did things I'm not proud of, saw things I cannot forget. Up here I can breathe, I can think." Catherine understood. She had her own demons, her own memories that haunted her. "Do you think you will ever go back? To civilization, I mean?" Caleb shrugged. "I do not know. Maybe. Or maybe I will stay up here until I am too old to trap anymore." "That seems like a lonely way to live," she said gently. He met her eyes, and for the first time, she saw the depth of the pain he carried. Lonely is better than broken. They did not speak of it again, but the conversation lingered in Catherine's mind. She found herself watching Caleb more closely, noticing the small ways he cared for her. He always made sure she had the warmest seat by the fire. He brought her wildflowers he found on his traps, awkwardly presenting them as if he did not know what else to do. He taught her to shoot his rifle, standing behind her to guide her aim, and she tried to ignore the way her heart raced at his nearness. She was falling for him, she realized with a start, this quiet, gentle giant of a man who had saved her from a nightmare and asked nothing in return. It was foolish, she told herself. She barely knew him, and come spring she would leave. But her heart did not listen to logic. One afternoon in late March, as the snow began to melt and the first hints of green appeared on the mountainside, Catherine was baking bread when Caleb burst through the door. His face was grim, and he carried his rifle in one hand. "Get away from the window," he said urgently. "Now," Catherine obeyed, her heart pounding. "What is it? What is wrong?" "Sullivan," Caleb said. "He is here. He must have tracked us." Catherine felt the blood drain from her face. "How?" "It has been over a month." "I do not know, but I saw him down by the creek. He has 2 other men with him." Caleb moved to the window, peering out carefully. "They are heading this way." "What do we do?" Catherine asked, her voice shaking. Caleb turned to her, and his expression was fierce. "You stay here. Bar the door after I leave. Do not open it for anyone but me." "You're going out there alone?" She grabbed his arm. "Caleb, there are 3 of them. They will kill you." "They will not," he said with absolute certainty. "I will not let them hurt you, Catherine. I promise." Before she could argue, he was gone, slipping out the door and into the trees. Catherine barred the door with trembling hands and pressed her face to the gap in the shutters, trying to see what was happening. She spotted Sullivan and his men emerging from the tree line. The trapper's wrist was still bandaged, and his face was twisted with hatred. The 2 men with him were rough-looking characters, armed with rifles and knives. "MacKenzie!" Sullivan shouted. "I know you are here. Send out the girl, and we will leave you be." Caleb stepped into view, his rifle held loosely but ready. He looked utterly calm, like a man who had faced down worse threats and survived. "You have no business here, Sullivan. Turn around and go back to town." Sullivan laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You think you can steal from me and get away with it? That girl belongs to me. Her father's debt makes her mine." "The debt was paid," Caleb said, "and she does not belong to anyone but herself." "I do not see it that way." Sullivan gestured to his men. "Take him." The two men raised their rifles, but Caleb was faster. His shot rang out and one of the men dropped, clutching his shoulder. The other man fired, but Caleb had already moved, rolling behind a fallen log. His second shot took the man in the leg, and he went down with a scream. Sullivan drew his own gun, but his injured wrist made him slow. Caleb charged forward, closing the distance before the trapper could aim. He slammed into Sullivan like a battering ram, and they went down in a tangle of limbs. Catherine watched in horror as the two men fought. Sullivan was wiry and vicious, fighting with the desperation of a cornered animal, but Caleb was stronger and more skilled. He took a punch to the jaw and barely flinched, then delivered a blow that sent Sullivan sprawling. "Stay down," Caleb growled, standing over him. "I will not tell you again." Sullivan spat blood and lunged with a knife Catherine had not seen him draw. Caleb sidestepped, but the blade caught his arm, slicing through his shirt. He grunted in pain and brought his fist down hard, connecting with Sullivan's temple. The trapper collapsed unconscious. Catherine threw open the door and ran to Caleb, her breath coming in gasps. "You are hurt!" He looked down at his arm, where blood was seeping through the torn fabric. "It is not deep. I will be fine." She helped him back to the cabin, and the two injured men Sullivan had brought limped away into the forest, leaving their leader behind. Caleb bound Sullivan's hands and feet with rope and left him outside, still unconscious. Inside, Catherine tended to Caleb's wound. Her hands shook as she cleaned the cut and wrapped it with strips of cloth, but she forced herself to focus. When she finished, she looked up at him, and the fear and adrenaline of the past hour finally overwhelmed her. She burst into tears. "Hey," Caleb said softly, pulling her into his arms. "It's all right. You are safe." "He could have killed you," Catherine sobbed into his chest. "You could have died because of me." "I would face 100 men like Sullivan if it meant keeping you safe," Caleb said, his voice rough with emotion. "Do you not understand, Catherine? You are not a burden to me. You are the best thing that has happened to me in years." She pulled back to look at him, her eyes wide. "What are you saying?" He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "I'm saying that I have fallen in love with you. I know I should not have. I know you are planning to leave come spring, but I cannot help it. You have brought light into my life, and I do not want to let you go." Catherine's heart soared. "I love you too, Caleb. I've been trying not to, but I cannot help it either." He kissed her then, a gentle, tentative kiss that quickly deepened into something more. Catherine melted into him, wrapping her arms around his neck, and for a moment, the world outside the cabin ceased to exist. There was only the two of them, and the fierce, beautiful love that had grown between them. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "Stay with me, not just until spring, forever." "Yes," Catherine whispered. "Yes, I will stay." They took Sullivan back to Silver Ridge the next day, along with a written account of what had happened. The sheriff, a gruff man named Tom Hargrove, listened to their story and nodded. "Sullivan's been trouble for a long time," he said. "I will make sure he understands that if he comes near either of you again, he will hang. You have my word." Caleb and Catherine stayed in town long enough to purchase supplies and to visit the preacher. They were married in a simple ceremony with Frank the barkeep and Pete Halloran as witnesses. Catherine wore a dress of soft blue cotton that Caleb had bought for her, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Caleb kissed her with a tenderness that made her knees weak. She had never been happier. They returned to the mountain, to the cabin that was now truly their home. The spring turned to summer, and Catherine discovered joys she had never imagined. She and Caleb worked side by side, tending a small garden and preserving food for the winter. They swam in the cold mountain streams and made love under the stars. They talked for hours by the fire, sharing dreams and fears, building a life together one day at a time. In the fall, Catherine realized she was pregnant. She told Caleb one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the peaks. He stared at her for a long moment, then pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "We are going to have a baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Catherine, you have made me the happiest man alive." Their son was born in the spring of 1877, a healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. They named him Daniel after Caleb's oldest brother who had died in the war. Caleb was a devoted father, gentle and patient, and Catherine often found herself watching the two of them together, her heart full to bursting. As Daniel grew, so did their family. A daughter, Emily, was born 2 years later, followed by another son, Thomas, the year after that. The cabin became too small, and Caleb built an addition, working through the summer to create more space for their growing brood. Life in the mountains was not always easy. There were harsh winters and times when supplies ran low. There were illnesses and injuries, moments when Catherine feared for her children's safety. But through it all, she and Caleb stood together, their love a constant source of strength. The children thrived in the wilderness. Daniel grew into a strong, capable boy who learned to trap and hunt at his father's side. Emily was fearless, climbing trees and exploring the forest with the same intensity her mother had once brought to surviving in Silver Ridge. Thomas was the quiet one, thoughtful and observant, always asking questions about the world beyond the mountains. As the years passed, Catherine sometimes thought about the night Sullivan had tried to wager her in that card game, the moment when Caleb had stepped in and changed the course of her life. She thought about how close she had come to a very different fate, and she was grateful every day for the man who had saved her. One evening, when Daniel was 10 and Emily was 8 and Thomas was 7, the family gathered around the fire after supper. The children were playing a game with carved wooden animals Caleb had made, and Catherine was mending a shirt. Caleb sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders, and they watched their children in comfortable silence. "Do you ever regret it?" Catherine asked quietly. "Giving up your solitude for all of this?" Caleb looked at her, his eyes warm. "Not for a single moment. You and the children are my whole world. I cannot imagine my life without you." She kissed him, a soft, lingering kiss that still made her heart race after all these years. "I love you, Caleb MacKenzie. I love you too, Catherine MacKenzie. Forever." The fire crackled, and outside, the wind whispered through the pines. The mountains stretched endlessly in all directions, wild and beautiful and untamed, and in the cabin, surrounded by the people she loved most in the world, Catherine felt at peace. She had found her home, not in a place, but in the arms of the man who had saved her, who had loved her, who had given her a life beyond her wildest dreams. The years continued to unfold with a gentle rhythm that Catherine had never dared to hope for in those dark days in Silver Ridge. By 1880, the MacKenzie cabin had become a small homestead, with Caleb filing a claim on the land and making their presence official in the eyes of the law. It had taken a trip down to the territorial office in Helena, a journey of several days, but Caleb had insisted on making everything legal to protect Catherine and the children. Daniel, now 13, had grown tall and broad-shouldered like his father. He accompanied Caleb on longer trapping expeditions, learning the patience and skill required to survive in the mountains. Emily, at 11, had discovered a talent for healing, collecting herbs and plants under her mother's guidance. She kept a careful journal of her findings, sketching the plants and noting their properties. Thomas, at 10, had developed an insatiable curiosity about everything, constantly asking questions about the stars, the animals, the way the seasons changed. Catherine had blossomed in the mountain life in ways she had never imagined possible. The frightened young woman who had served whiskey in a dusty saloon seemed like a distant memory. She was strong now, capable, her hands calloused from work but her heart full. She could shoot as well as Caleb, dress a deer, preserve meat, and deliver a calf. She had learned to read the weather, to predict when storms were coming, and to navigate the forest trails. But it was the quiet moments she treasured most, mornings when she woke to find Caleb watching her with that soft expression that still made her blush. Evenings when the family gathered to tell stories, the children hanging on every word as Caleb recounted his adventures or Catherine shared tales from her childhood. Nights when she and Caleb lay together, wrapped in furs, talking in hushed voices about their dreams for the future. They were not completely isolated. Other settlers had begun moving into the region, and the Mackenzies had developed friendships with a few neighboring families. There was the Johnsons, a family of ranchers about 15 miles south, and the Petersons, who ran a small trading post at the base of the mountain. Twice a year, there were gatherings where the scattered families came together to share news, trade goods, and celebrate. It was at one of these gatherings in the summer of 1881 that Catherine saw a face from her past. She was helping to set out food for the communal meal when she heard a familiar voice calling her name. "Catherine? Catherine Brennan?" She turned to find a woman approaching, and it took her a moment to recognize Mary Sullivan, Jack Sullivan's younger sister. Catherine had not seen Mary since before she left Silver Ridge, and her first instinct was to reach for the knife she still kept at her side. But Mary's hands were raised in a gesture of peace. "Please, do not be alarmed," Mary said quickly. "I only want to talk." Caleb appeared at Catherine's side in an instant, his hand on her shoulder. He had seen Mary approaching and had come to protect his wife. "What do you want?" Mary looked between them, her expression earnest. "I wanted to apologize for my brother, for everything he put you through." Catherine exchanged a glance with Caleb, then gestured for Mary to continue. "Jack is dead," Mary said quietly. "He died 2 years ago in a saloon fight in Wyoming. When I heard what he had done to you, what he tried to do, I was ashamed. He was my brother, but he was a bad man. I wanted you to know that I never agreed with how he treated you, and I wanted to tell you that I am glad you escaped him." Catherine felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she had not even realized she was carrying. Sullivan had been a shadow in the back of her mind all these years, a fear that he might return. Knowing he was gone brought a sense of closure she had not expected. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. "I appreciate your courage in coming here." Mary nodded, relief evident on her face. "You look happy, truly happy. I'm glad." After Mary left, Caleb pulled Catherine close. "Are you all right?" "I am," she said, surprised to find it was true. "I think I finally feel free." That night, as they lay in bed, Catherine found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the young woman who had been so desperate and afraid, who had seen no way out. She thought about the mountain man who had stepped in with his fist instead of a wager, who had chosen to protect her when no one else would. And she thought about the life they had built together, brick by brick, moment by moment. "Caleb?" she whispered in the darkness. Do you remember the night we met? In the saloon?" She felt him shift beside her. "Every detail." "What made you do it? Why did you help me?" He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "I saw you standing there, so scared but so fierce. You were not going to let Sullivan take you without a fight, and I thought about all the times in my life when I needed help and did not get it, all the times I wished someone had stepped in. I could not walk away from you." Catherine turned to face him, her hand finding his in the darkness. "You saved my life that night, in more ways than you know." "You saved mine too," he said. "I was barely living before you came here, just existing. You gave me a reason to feel again." She kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into that single gesture. He responded with equal passion, and they came together in the darkness, their bodies familiar but their desire as fresh as it had been on their wedding night. The following year brought changes to the territory. The railroad continued to push west, bringing more settlers and more opportunities. Towns that had been little more than mining camps were growing into real communities. Silver Ridge had a school now, and a proper church. The territorial government was talking about statehood, though that was still years away. Daniel, now 15, began expressing interest in the world beyond the mountains. He had inherited his father's size and strength, but he also had Catherine's sharp mind and curiosity. He talked about wanting to see the cities, to learn about engineering and construction. It pained Catherine to think of him leaving, but she understood. The mountain was her refuge, but for Daniel, it might feel like a cage. "He is young," Caleb said when she shared her concerns. "Let him dream. When he is ready, we will help him find his path, whatever that may be." Emily, on the other hand, seemed content to stay in the mountains forever. At 13, she was already talking about becoming a healer, about studying medicine if she could find a way to do it. She had a gift for it, a natural empathy and a gentle touch that animals and people alike responded to. Thomas, at 12, remained the family intellectual. He had taught himself to read from the handful of books they owned, reading them over and over until he had them memorized. Caleb had begun making the journey to the trading post more frequently to purchase new books for him, and Thomas devoured each one with enthusiasm. In the spring of 1883, Catherine discovered she was pregnant again. It was a surprise, as she had assumed her childbearing years were behind her. She was 34 now, and it had been 7 years since Thomas was born. But there was no mistaking the signs, and when she told Caleb, he swept her up in his arms and spun her around, laughing with joy. "Another baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "Catherine, you are amazing." This pregnancy was harder than the others. Catherine was older, and the mountain winters took their toll. She tired easily, and there were days when she could barely get out of bed. Caleb became fiercely protective, taking over most of the household chores and refusing to let her lift anything heavy. The children rallied around her as well. Emily took over much of the cooking, and Daniel handled the heavier outdoor work. Thomas kept her company, reading to her for hours on end. The family drew closer during those difficult months, their love for one another a tangible presence in the cabin. The baby, another daughter, was born in January of 1884 during a fierce snowstorm. It was a difficult birth, and for a terrifying few hours, Catherine was not sure she would survive. Emily assisted with the delivery, her young hands steady and sure, while Caleb held Catherine's hand and whispered words of encouragement. When the baby finally arrived, small but healthy, Catherine wept with relief. They named her Grace, for the grace of God that had seen them through. Grace was a delicate child, smaller than the others had been, but she had a spirit that filled the cabin with light. Caleb doted on her shamelessly, carrying her everywhere and singing to her in his rumbling voice. Daniel and Thomas were gentle with their baby sister, and Emily appointed herself as Grace's guardian. As Grace grew, so did the changes in the territory. Montana achieved statehood in 1889, a milestone that was celebrated throughout the region. Silver Ridge had grown into a prosperous town with a population of over 1,000. There were talk of a branch line of the railroad coming through, which would connect the town to the larger cities. Daniel, now 22, had left the mountain 3 years earlier to attend a technical school in Helena. It had been one of the hardest days of Catherine's life, watching her firstborn ride away. But he visited when he could, and his letters were full of excitement about his studies. He was learning to design bridges and buildings, and he talked about the future with an enthusiasm that reminded Catherine of Caleb. Emily, at 20, had married a young doctor named Samuel Peterson, the son of the family that ran the trading post. Samuel had studied medicine in the East and had returned to Montana to practice. He and Emily had built a small clinic at the base of the mountain where they treated the scattered families in the region. Catherine was proud of her daughter, who had pursued her dreams with determination. Thomas, at 19, had surprised everyone by deciding to become a teacher. He'd gone to work at the school in Silver Ridge, teaching reading and mathematics to children of the growing community. He lived in town during the week and came home to the mountain on weekends, bringing news and supplies. Grace, now 6, was the light of Catherine and Caleb's life. She was curious and clever, with her mother's green eyes and her father's dark hair. She followed Caleb everywhere, asking endless questions and insisting on helping with every task. Caleb, now in his early 50s, had slowed down a bit, but he was still strong and capable. His hair had gone gray at the temples, and his beard was streaked with white, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. Catherine, at 40, felt the weight of the years, but also the satisfaction of a life well lived. She looked at her husband, at the home they had built, at the children they had raised, and she felt a deep sense of gratitude. The mountains had given her more than shelter. They had given her a family, a purpose, a love that had sustained her through every challenge. One evening in the fall of 1890, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Caleb took Catherine's hand. "Do you ever think about that night in the saloon?" he asked, "about how different things could have been?" "All the time," she admitted. "If you had not been there, if you had not stepped in, I do not know where I would be now, dead probably, or wishing I was." "I think about it too," Caleb said. "I think about how close I came to just ordering my whiskey and leaving. I almost did not get involved." Catherine squeezed his hand. "But you did, and you changed everything." He smiled, that slow, gentle smile that still made her heart skip. "You changed everything for me, too. Before you, I was just surviving. You taught me how to live again." They sat in companionable silence, watching as the sky turned from gold to pink to deep purple. Grace was inside, playing with a doll Caleb had carved for her. The cabin was warm and welcoming, filled with the scent of fresh bread and wood smoke. "I love you, Catherine MacKenzie," Caleb said, "more than words can say." "I love you too, Caleb, forever." The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and sorrows. Daniel married and had children of his own, and he brought them to visit the mountain every summer. Emily and Samuel had a daughter and a son, both of whom showed their mother's gift for healing. Thomas married a young woman from Silver Ridge, a fellow teacher, and they settled into a happy life in town. Grace grew into a spirited young woman, determined to stay on the mountain and carry on her parents' legacy. She had inherited Caleb's strength and Catherine's sharp mind, and she was as comfortable in the wilderness as she was in town. When she turned 18, she announced her intention to file a claim on the land adjacent to her parents' homestead and build her own cabin. Caleb, now 63, helped Grace build her cabin just as he had built the original one decades earlier. Catherine watched them work together, father and daughter, and she was filled with pride. This mountain had been her salvation, and now it would be Grace's home as well. In the spring of 1899, Catherine and Caleb celebrated their 23rd wedding anniversary. They were both older now, their hair gray, their bodies showing the wear of decades of hard work. But their love had not diminished. If anything, it had deepened, tempered by time and trial into something unbreakable. They threw a party, inviting all their children and grandchildren to the mountain. Daniel came from Helena with his wife and 3 children. Emily and Samuel arrived from the clinic with their 2. Thomas and his wife brought their newborn son. Grace, who lived just a mile away, walked over with a basket of fresh bread. The cabin was crowded and noisy, filled with laughter and love. "Catherine, do you remember what you said to me that first night?" Catherine asked. "When you offered to let me stay at the cabin?" "I said I could use help with the work," Caleb replied, "and that you would be safe." "You kept your promise," Catherine said. "I have been safe here, loved, cherished. You gave me a life I never thought I could have." "You gave me the same," Caleb said, his voice rough with emotion. "Before you, I was just a broken man hiding in the mountains. You healed me, Catherine. You made me whole." They held each other in the darkness, 2 people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a love that had endured. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, and the stars shone bright and cold. The mountains stood eternal and unchanging, a testament to the strength and beauty of the wild places. And in the cabin, surrounded by the echoes of laughter and love, Catherine and Caleb drifted off to sleep, secure in the knowledge that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. The new century dawned with promise and change. The world was transforming rapidly, with new inventions and ideas reshaping the landscape. But in the mountains of Montana, time moved at its own pace. Catherine and Caleb, now in their 60s, continued to live much as they always had, finding joy in the simple rhythms of mountain life. Grace married in 1902, a young man named Robert who worked as a forest ranger. He had the same love for the wilderness that the MacKenzie family did, and he fit seamlessly into their lives. Grace and Robert built their life on the land adjacent to Caleb and Catherine's, and they worked together to expand the homestead. Catherine often reflected on how much had changed since that fateful night in the Red Canyon saloon. She had gone from a terrified young woman with no prospects to a matriarch of a thriving family. She had weathered storms both literal and figurative, had brought children into the world and watched them grow into remarkable adults. And through it all, Caleb had been her rock, her partner, her great love. As they grew older, Catherine and Caleb took more time to simply enjoy each other's company. They would sit on the porch for hours, watching the changing seasons, reminiscing about the past and marveling at how blessed they had been. They talked about the grandchildren, about the ways the world was changing, about the memories they had accumulated over the decades. "I never thought I would live to see the turn of the century," Caleb said one afternoon in 1905. They were sitting by the creek, watching the water flow over the rocks. let alone see it with you by my side." "We have been lucky," Catherine agreed. "So very lucky." Caleb reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "It was not luck, Catherine. It was grace. The grace of finding each other, of building this life together. Every day with you has been a gift." She leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid strength of him, even now in their older years. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not come into the saloon that night? If you had just stayed in the mountains?" "I used to," Caleb admitted, "but not anymore. I believe we were meant to find each other. Some force greater than ourselves brought us together." Catherine smiled. "The mountain man who laid down his fist instead of a wager." "And won the greatest prize of all," Caleb said, kissing the top of her head. "You." They continued to sit by the creek, two souls intertwined, watching as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The mountains rose around them, steadfast and eternal, and the sound of the water was a soothing melody. They had built their heaven here, in this wild and beautiful place, and they were content. As the years passed, health challenges came, as they inevitably do with age. Caleb developed arthritis in his hands, making the delicate work of trapping difficult. Catherine's eyesight began to fail, and she had to give up some of the intricate sewing she once loved. But they adapted, finding new ways to contribute, leaning on each other more than ever. Their children and grandchildren visited often, bringing joy and energy to the homestead. Daniel's children were teenagers now, strong and capable, eager to learn the ways of the mountain from their grandparents. Emily's daughter was studying to become a doctor like her father, while her son was considering following in Daniel's footsteps as an engineer. Thomas's children were bookish and thoughtful, always ready with a question or observation. And Grace's children, the youngest of the grandchildren, were wild and free, true children of the mountains. In 1908, on their 31st wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered once again. It was a warm summer day, and they had set up tables outside under the pine trees. There was music and laughter, food and drink, and an overwhelming sense of love and connection. Caleb stood up to make a toast, his voice still strong despite his years. 31 years ago, I married the most remarkable woman I have ever known. She was brave and beautiful, fierce and kind. She still is all of those things and more. Catherine, you have given me a life beyond my wildest dreams. You have made me a husband, a father, a grandfather. You have filled my days with purpose and my nights with love. I thank God every day that I walked into that saloon in Silver Ridge." There were tears and applause, and Catherine stood to embrace her husband. "And I thank God every day that you were brave enough to step in, to risk yourself for a stranger. You saved me, Caleb MacKenzie. And then you loved me. What more could any woman ask?" The celebration continued into the evening, with the younger grandchildren running through the trees and the adults sitting around the fire, telling stories and sharing memories. As the stars came out, Catherine looked around at the faces illuminated by firelight, at the generations she and Caleb had brought into the world, and she felt a profound sense of peace. This was their legacy. Not wealth or fame, but love. Love that had started with a single act of courage, that had grown and deepened over decades, that had created a family bound together by ties stronger than blood. Love that would continue long after she and Caleb were gone, passed down through their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren yet to come. As the party wound down and people began to settle in for the night, Catherine and Caleb walked hand in hand back to their cabin. The moon was full, casting silver light across the clearing, and the air was filled with the scent of pine and wood smoke. "It has been a good life," Caleb said softly. "The best life," Catherine agreed. They stood on the porch for a moment, looking out at the mountains that had been their home for over 3 decades. The peaks rose dark against the starlit sky, ancient and enduring. They had seen generations come and go, had witnessed countless lives unfold in their shadow. And they would continue long after Catherine and Caleb were dust. But in this moment, standing here with the man she loved, Catherine felt immortal. Their love was a living thing, a force that transcended time and mortality. It lived in their children, in the walls of the cabin Caleb had built, in the very earth beneath their feet. "Come to bed," Caleb said, his voice warm with affection. I want to hold you." Catherine smiled and let him lead her inside. They prepared for bed slowly, moving with the careful deliberation of age, but their affection for each other was as fresh as it had been on their wedding night. When they finally lay down together, wrapped in each other's arms, Catherine felt complete. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Caleb replied, "always and forever." They drifted off to sleep, two hearts beating as one, secure in the knowledge that whatever the future held, they would face it together. Their story, which had begun with violence and fear, had transformed into something beautiful and enduring. They had taken the broken pieces of their pasts and forged them into a love that would echo through the generations. The mountain stood watch over them, silent and protective, as it had for all the years of their marriage, and in the cabin, surrounded by memories and love, Catherine and Caleb rested, their souls intertwined for all eternity. Years continued to pass with gentle persistence, each season bringing its own rhythm to the mountain. By 1912, Catherine was 63 and Caleb was 71. Their bodies had slowed considerably, but their minds remained sharp, and their love for each other had only deepened with time. They had moved into a new reality where their roles had shifted, with Grace and Robert taking on most of the physical labor of maintaining the homestead, while Catherine and Caleb offered wisdom and guidance. The world beyond the mountains was changing rapidly. News reached them of automobiles becoming more common, of airplanes taking flight, of tensions brewing in Europe that would eventually explode into what people would call the Great War. But here in the Montana wilderness, life moved at its own steady pace, measured not by technological advances, but by the turning of the seasons and the gathering of family. Daniel had become a respected engineer in Helena, having designed several important bridges across Montana rivers. He visited twice a year, always bringing his grandchildren who were now having children of their own. Catherine marveled at becoming a great-grandmother, at seeing her legacy extend into a fourth generation. These little ones would never know the fear she had lived with in Silver Ridge, would never understand the desperation that had driven her. They would grow up in a different world, one of increasing opportunity and progress. Emily's medical practice had flourished, and she had trained several young doctors who now worked alongside her and Samuel. Their clinic had expanded to serve dozens of families scattered throughout the region. Emily still came to the mountain at least once a month, checking on her parents' health and bringing medicines and supplies. She was 53 now, her hair touched with gray, but her eyes still held the same compassionate light that had drawn her to healing in the first place. Thomas had become the headmaster of the school in Silver Ridge, a position he took seriously and performed with dedication. He had transformed the small schoolhouse into a proper educational institution, adding grades and subjects until students could receive a full secondary education without leaving town. His own children, now adults, had scattered across Montana, but they all returned for holidays and celebrations. Thomas visited his parents every few weeks, always bringing books and newspapers to keep them connected to the wider world. Grace and Robert, now in their early 30s, had become the true keepers of the mountain homestead. They had expanded the property, adding a small herd of cattle and several horses. Their 3 children, ranging from 8 to 14, were being raised in the same wild beauty that had shaped Grace's childhood. They were strong, capable children who could track a deer, fish the mountain streams, and navigate the forest with confidence. Watching them, Catherine saw echoes of her own children and felt the continuity of their family story. One crisp autumn morning in 1913, Catherine woke to find Caleb already up, sitting in his rocking chair by the window. He was looking out at the mountains, his expression peaceful but distant. She rose slowly, her joints protesting, and moved to stand behind him, placing her hands on his broad shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. "About how it all began," Caleb replied, reaching up to cover her hand with his. "About that night in the saloon. About the choice I made." "Do you regret it?" Catherine asked, though she knew the answer. "Never," he said firmly, turning to look at her. "Walking into that saloon, seeing you there, standing up to Sullivan, that was the best decision I ever made. Everything good in my life came from that moment." Catherine moved around to sit in the chair beside him, and they held hands as they watched the morning light spread across the mountains. The peaks were already dusted with the first snow of the season, a reminder that winter was approaching. We have had a good life, haven't we? Catherine said, her voice thoughtful. The best, Caleb agreed. Better than I ever imagined possible. They sat in comfortable silence, two people who had shared so much that words were often unnecessary. Catherine thought about the young woman she had been, frightened and trapped, seeing no way out. She thought about the mountain man who had saved her, not for reward or recognition, but simply because it was the right thing to do. And she thought about the love that had blossomed between them, unexpected and fierce and enduring. Do you remember what you said to me on our wedding night? Catherine asked. Caleb smiled, the memory clearly vivid in his mind. I said that I would spend every day of my life trying to make you happy. You succeeded, Catherine said, tears gathering in her eyes. You more than succeeded, Caleb. You gave me everything I never knew I wanted. A home, a family, safety, love, so much love. He reached out and brushed away her tears with his thumb, his touch as gentle as it had been 36 years ago. You gave me the same, Catherine. You took a broken, lonely man and made him whole. You gave me purpose and joy. You made me believe in goodness again. They spent the day together, moving slowly through familiar routines. Catherine prepared their meals while Caleb tended to small repairs around the cabin. Grace stopped by in the afternoon with fresh bread and news from the lower homestead. The grandchildren came running in, full of energy and stories, and for a while the cabin was filled with noise and laughter. As evening fell, and Grace gathered her family to return home, Catherine stood on the porch and watched them go. The youngest grandchild, 8-year-old Sarah, turned back to wave, her face bright with happiness. Catherine waved back, her heart full. They are good children, Caleb said, coming to stand beside her. Grace and Robert are raising them well. Just as we raised our children well, Catherine said. We have so much to be proud of, Caleb. That night, as they lay in bed, Caleb pulled Catherine close. She rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, a sound that had comforted her for decades. Catherine, Caleb said softly, if I could go back and live my life again, I would not change a single thing. Every hardship, every struggle, it all led me to you, and you were worth it all. I feel the same, Catherine whispered. You are my great adventure, Caleb MacKenzie, my great love. They held each other in the darkness, two souls who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life of meaning and purpose. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, and the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance. The mountains stood sentinel, as they had for millennia, witnesses to the small but significant drama of human love and connection. The winter of 1913 was harsh, with heavy snows and bitter cold. Catherine and Caleb spent most of their time by the fire, wrapped in blankets and furs, telling stories and reading books that Thomas brought them. Grace checked on them daily, making sure they had enough food and firewood, that they were warm and comfortable. One particularly cold January night, Caleb woke with chest pains. Catherine, immediately alert, sent Grace's eldest son running for Emily. The doctor arrived within hours, having made the difficult journey through deep snow, and she examined her father with professional care, tempered by deep love. Your heart is tired, Papa, Emily said gently. You need to rest. No more working outside, no more heavy lifting. Caleb nodded, accepting this limitation with grace. I have lived a long life, Emily, a good life. I am not afraid of what comes next. Do not talk like that, Catherine said fiercely, gripping his hand. You are not leaving me yet. Not if I can help it, Caleb assured her with a smile. I plan to be around to annoy you for many more years. He recovered from that episode, but it was clear that time was catching up with him. He moved more slowly, tired more easily. But his mind remained sharp, and his love for Catherine never wavered. He spent his days in the rocking chair, watching the mountains and telling stories to whichever grandchildren or great-grandchildren happened to be visiting. Catherine stayed close to him, reading aloud from their favorite books, preparing his favorite meals, simply sitting beside him in companionable silence. Their children visited more frequently, sensing that their time together was growing short. The cabin was rarely empty, always filled with family who wanted to spend time with the patriarch and matriarch of the clan. Spring came late in 1914, but when it finally arrived, it brought an explosion of life. The wildflowers bloomed in profusion, and the streams ran high with snowmelt. Caleb, feeling stronger with the warmer weather, insisted on taking short walks with Catherine. They would move slowly along familiar paths, stopping often to rest but making the journey together. On one such walk in May, they reached a high meadow that overlooked the valley. It was one of their favorite spots, a place they had come to countless times over the years. They sat on a fallen log, and Catherine leaned against Caleb's shoulder. "Do you remember bringing me here for the first time?" Catherine asked. "It was summer, and the meadow was full of butterflies." "I remember," Caleb said. "I wanted to show you something beautiful. I wanted you to see the mountain the way I saw it." "I fell in love with you that day," Catherine confessed. "I had been fighting it, trying to protect myself, but sitting here with you, seeing the joy in your face as you showed me this place, I could not help it. I loved you." "I fell in love with you the moment I saw you in the saloon," Caleb said. "Standing there, scared but defiant. You were the bravest person I had ever seen. I knew right then that you were special." They sat in the meadow for a long time, soaking in the sunshine and the beauty around them. When they finally made their way back to the cabin, both were tired but content. That night they fell asleep in each other's arms, grateful for another day together. Summer passed peacefully, with the extended family gathering for a large celebration on the 4th of July. Daniel came with his entire family, 3 generations strong. Emily and Samuel brought their children and grandchildren. Thomas arrived with his wife and their scattered brood. And Grace, of course, was there with Robert and their children. The homestead was filled with people, with laughter and love and the continuity of family. Catherine, watching from the porch, felt overwhelmed with gratitude. She'd given birth to 4 children, but through them she'd created this vast network of love and connection. Every person here was part of her legacy, part of the story that had begun in a smoke-filled saloon so many years ago. Caleb, sitting beside her, seemed to sense her thoughts. "We did good, didn't we?" "We did," Catherine agreed, tears streaming down her face. "We did so very good." As autumn approached, Caleb's health began to decline more noticeably. He slept more, ate less, moved with increasing difficulty. Emily came to stay at the cabin, wanting to be close to her father. She brought medicines to ease his pain, but they all knew that she could not stop what was coming. One cool September evening, with the aspens turning gold on the mountainside, Caleb asked Catherine to come sit with him on the porch. The family gave them privacy, sensing the significance of the moment. Catherine sat close to her husband, holding his hand, both of them looking out at the mountains they had called home for so long. "I am proud of us," Caleb said, his voice weak but clear. "Of everything we built together, our children, our grandchildren, this place. It is a good legacy." "It is," Catherine agreed, her throat tight with unshed tears. "We took 2 broken people and made something beautiful." "I need you to promise me something," Caleb said, turning to look at her. "When I am gone, do not mourn too long. Live, Catherine. Enjoy your children and grandchildren. Take joy in each day. That is what I want for you." "Do not talk about leaving," Catherine said, but she knew it was inevitable. They had both known it was coming. "I have to," Caleb said gently, "because I need you to know something. Loving you has been the greatest honor of my life. You made me better than I ever thought I could be. You gave me purpose and meaning. I am grateful for every single day we have had together." Catherine was crying openly now, but she forced herself to speak. "I love you, Caleb MacKenzie. I have loved you from the moment you stepped between me and Sullivan. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I know," Caleb said, pulling her close, "and I love you. Forever." They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple. The mountains stood eternal and unchanging, a testament to the enduring nature of love and family. And in that moment, Catherine felt the full weight of their story, from beginning to what would soon be an end. But it was not a sad ending, she realized. It was a completion, a circle closing. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and created something that would outlast them both. And that was enough. Caleb passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 nights later, with Catherine holding his hand. He was 73 years old and had lived to see 4 generations of Mackenzies. The family gathered for a funeral that was more celebration than mourning, sharing stories of the man who had been husband, father, grandfather, and great-grandfather. They buried him on the mountain he had loved, in a spot overlooking the valley where wildflowers would bloom each spring. Catherine grieved deeply, as anyone would after losing their life partner. But she also found comfort in her children and grandchildren, in the legacy she and Caleb had created. She continued living in the cabin, with Grace and Robert nearby to help with whatever she needed. The months after Caleb's death were difficult, but Catherine drew strength from her memories and from the family surrounding her. She told stories about Caleb to the younger grandchildren who had not known him well, making sure his memory would live on. She worked on a quilt that incorporated pieces of clothing from every stage of their life together, creating a tangible record of their journey. On what would have been their 39th wedding anniversary, Catherine took a walk to Caleb's grave. She brought wildflowers and sat beside the headstone, talking to him as if he were still there. "I miss you," she said quietly, "every single day. But I'm trying to do what you asked. I'm living, Caleb. I'm finding joy in our children and grandchildren. I'm grateful for the life we built." The wind rustled through the trees, and Catherine imagined it was Caleb's response. She sat for a long time, feeling his presence in the mountain itself, in the very air she breathed. He was gone, but he was also still there, woven into the fabric of this place they had made their home. When she finally rose to leave, Catherine felt a sense of peace settle over her. She and Caleb had been blessed with 37 years of marriage, decades of love and partnership. Not everyone got that. Not everyone found their person, the one soul who completed them. But she had, and she would carry that gift with her for the rest of her days. Catherine lived for 6 more years, surrounded by the love of her family. She saw her great-grandchildren grow, saw new babies born into the family. She remained in the cabin where she and Caleb had built their life, tended by Grace and visited regularly by all her children. In the spring of 1920, Catherine passed away peacefully in her sleep, exactly as Caleb had. She was 71 years old. The family laid her to rest beside her beloved husband, reuniting them in death as they had been in life. At her funeral, Daniel stood to speak about his mother. "She started life with nothing," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She faced hardships and fears that would have broken a lesser person, but she survived, and more than that, she thrived. She found love in the wilderness, built a family against all odds, and created a legacy that will endure for generations. Every one of us here exists because of her courage and her strength. We honor her by living well, by loving fiercely, and by remembering the story of how it all began." And so the story of Catherine and Caleb became legend in the family, passed down from generation to generation. The tale of the trapper who tried to win her in a card game, and the mountain man who laid down his fist instead of a wager. The story of courage and love, of 2 broken people who found each other and made something whole. The cabin still stands, maintained by the descendants of Catherine and Caleb MacKenzie. It has become a gathering place for the family, a reminder of where they came from and the love that founded their clan. And each summer, when the wildflowers bloom in the high meadow, someone from the family makes the pilgrimage to the graves overlooking the valley, bringing flowers and stories and gratitude for the love that started it all. The mountains remain, eternal and unchanging, keeping watch over the legacy of a love that transcended time and hardship. And somewhere, in the whisper of the wind through the pines, in the rush of the mountain streams, in the very earth itself, the spirits of Catherine and Caleb MacKenzie endure, their love story a testament to the power of courage, compassion, and the human heart. Their great-great-grandchildren tell the story still, gathering around fires and speaking in hushed, reverent tones about the woman who faced down a cruel trapper and the mountain man who saved her. They speak of a love that built a family, that transformed fear into hope, that proved true love can conquer all. And they remember, always remember, that it all began with a single act of courage in a smoke-filled saloon in Silver Ridge, Montana, in the winter of 1876, when a stranger stepped forward and changed 2 lives forever.